This is our, what did I say, fourth English composition class? Third or fourth? Let me get the board ready here. English composition. We're studying the third chapter in the book, so let's call this lesson 3 of English composition. English composition lesson 3. So get your notes ready. Make sure at the top of your page for your notes you have your name and the date. Put the name of the course, English composition, and the lesson number. All right, make sure you keep your name and date and lesson name on top of your notes, or else you're going to get confused if you end up with a pile of notes and you don't know what's what. Also, if you go on to a second page in your notes, put the lesson and course on the top of the second page, so you keep them together, okay? Or just put the same heading on the second page if you don't get to staple them. So in English composition, we're studying and practicing how to write in English, and we're seeking to learn how to avoid some problems that students have in writing, which sometimes discourage them from writing and can affect their whole lives, can make them not like school, not want to study, not like writing. And writing is very, very important no matter what you do, whether you're whether you work as what's called a learned or educated profession, like a priest or a doctor or a lawyer. You have to write things, or whether you're working even in just common business, you still have to write things. You have to write letters, you have to write advertisements. Writing is very, very important no matter what you do. Even if you're just writing personal letters just to friends or emails and things like that, writing is very, very important, and many schools do such a bad job teaching children about composition that they don't want to write. They don't like writing. In our first lesson, we learned why students don't like to write. It's not because they don't actually like to write. It's that writing classes and writing programs are artificial, and they often ask students to do things that don't make any sense. It's not how writing works. When we actually write in real life, we write about topics that we're interested in. We write about topics that we know a lot about, and we write to people who we think are interested in what we have to write. And in school assignments, we don't do that. In school assignments, we're often asked to write about topics we don't know anything about topics we're not interested in, and to an audience that we don't even know if they're interested in what we have to say. So everything about school writing is often wrong, and that's one of the reasons why students don't learn to write and don't like to write. And we talked about that in lesson 1. We said that you should write about topics that you're interested in, you should write about topics that you know a lot about, and you should write to people who you think are interested in what you have to write. And when we saw in that first lesson that that's usually how we speak. We like to speak. We usually have to be told to be quiet, right? We usually talk too much. Most of the time we get yelled at to be quiet because we like speaking. We like communicating. But when we talk about topics we like. We talk about topics we know about. We talk about topics with other people who we know are interested in. And that's why we like talking. And that's why we should like writing, because it's the same thing just in writing. It's the same thing as speaking, but we're using written language instead of spoken language. Okay? So the way that we can enjoy writing is by writing about topics we're interested in, writing about topics that we know about, and writing to audiences that we think will be interested. In our second lesson, we talked about where ideas come from in writing. Students often complain when they're asked to write about a topic, they complain that they don't know what to write. We hear people talk about something called writer's block. Writer's block is where a person sits down to write and they can't think of what to write. Well, there's no such thing as writer's block. The problem with writer's block is that a person is trying to write about a topic that he doesn't know enough about to write. And we learned in that second lesson, we learned where we can get ideas from. We said our experiences, right? That was the first source of ideas is experience. And that's what makes your writing interesting. What makes your writing interesting is that you have different experiences than other people. That's why you always have something interesting to write about. No one else has the same experience as you do, and so you have interesting stuff to write about, your own experiences. We learned that experiences are the first source of ideas. We learned that imagination is the second source of ideas. We talked about imagination a little bit. I'll just jot these down. The first source of ideas is experience. The second source of ideas is imagination. And we said that imagination doesn't mean making up stories. It doesn't mean inventing things or making things up out of nowhere. That's really not possible. Imagination is simply joining together and thinking about ideas that have come from experience in different ways. And I gave you an example of a purple rabbit. You can imagine a purple rabbit because you have seen a rabbit and you've seen the color purple. You've never seen a purple rabbit, but you can join those two ideas together and imagine a purple rabbit, right? If you had never seen a rabbit before and I said imagine a purple rabbit, you wouldn't be able to imagine a purple rabbit because you don't know what a rabbit is. And so you can only imagine things that you already know about. But you simply combine them with different ideas in different ways. That's what the imagination is. Okay? So imagination is the second source of ideas, and the third source of ideas is language. And through language, we can learn ideas from other people's experience and other people's imagination. So through language, by speaking to people, by reading what others write, by language, we can learn ideas from other people's experience and other people's imagination. So these are the three sources of ideas. The three sources of ideas. Three sources of ideas: experience, imagination, and language. That was the topic of lesson 2. In this third lesson, the topic is advantages of expressing ideas gained from experience. I'm going to erase this. The topic of lesson 3 is the advantages of expressing ideas gained from experience. Advantages of expressing ideas gained from experience. And let's just take a minute and read through this lesson. Lesson number 3. Young people sometimes find difficulty in writing because they quote-unquote have nothing to say. And you know what that feels like. You've had to write before and you just don't know what to write. Maybe for a comprehension question in an assignment. Young people sometimes find difficulty in writing because they have nothing to say. Such a reason will not hold in regard to ideas gained from experience. You can't say, I have nothing to say about your experience, right? If I asked you, what did you do yesterday? You can't say, I have nothing to say, right? If I say, what did you get for Christmas? You can't say, I have nothing to say. What did you do last summer? You can't say, I have nothing to say. I don't know what to write. Okay? So the first advantage of writing from experience is you always have things to say. You always have ideas to share. Everyone has a multitude of experiences every day. Everyone has a multitude of experiences every day, at least one of which is of sufficient interest to cause him to wish to tell it. Every day we have experiences. Every day. And every day there's some experience that we have that's interesting that we share with someone. Every day. Much of that which happens to you or to your friends, especially that which happens outside of the regular routine of schoolwork, is interesting and worth telling. Experience furnishes an abundance of material suitable for composition purposes. But a greater advantage comes from the fact that the ideas are sure to be your own. So the first advantage we're going to talk about, the first advantage is that there is plenty, or there's an abundance of ideas from your own experience. There's an abundance of ideas. You're alive for 24 hours a day. There's stuff going on all the time. You're seeing things, hearing things, tasting things, touching things all day long. Even when you're asleep, you have dreams, and your dreams might be worth writing about. So there's just an endless supply of information in your daily experience. And what's especially useful about those events and those experiences, is that your experiences are not the same as anyone else's. And so you always have something interesting and unique to write about, your own experiences. The second advantage of writing about your experience is that the ideas that you're going to write about are your own ideas. They're your own ideas. If I said to you, write a story about the first time that I rode my bike. Write a story about the first time I rode my bike. It'd be very difficult because you don't know, it's not your ideas. You don't even know what it was like. You have no idea what kind of bike I rode or where I lived or what, you don't know any of the details. So of course you would say, I don't know what to write. It's not your experience. Okay? So the second advantage is they're your own ideas. Our book says, this is the first requisite, the first necessary thing in successful composition. To express ideas that are not your own is mere copy work and is seldom worth doing. Why is it not worth copying ideas? Because they're already written. Why would you write something that's already written? In the third place, the third advantage, the ideas are not only your own, but they are likely to be clear and definite. The ideas are likely to be clear and definite. Why are they clear and definite? If you're writing about your own experience, why are those ideas clear and definite? Because you did it. You saw it. You heard it. You smelled it. You tasted it. You felt it. You know exactly what the details were. That's one of the reasons why lying never works. When you lie, you try to talk about things that you didn't actually experience. And usually, people who have experienced them know you're lying because they know those things with clear and definite ideas, and you don't. And when you try to lie about them, they can tell you're lying. Right? That's why if you want to catch someone who's lying, if you want to catch someone lying, just keep asking them to retell the story. You know, if you see the person again the next day, ask him about what he said yesterday, and you'll see the story changes because he forgets what he said because he made up the details. That's why in the military or in the police, they have interrogators who ask questions to criminals, and they have a whole strategy for how they continually ask questions, and they record all the answers, and then they compare the answers, and they can find places where there's changes to catch them lying. Because when we talk about experiences that are not our experiences, it's hard to be clear and definite in the details. But when you write about your experiences, you can be clear and definite because you saw it, right? You know what it's like to ride a bike? Remember the first time you rode a bike? You can talk about what it felt like because you did it. You know exactly what it felt like. You know exactly what it was like because you did it. Remember what falling off your bike? You know exactly what it felt like. You know exactly what it was like because you did it. Okay? You can talk exactly about it. But if I ask you something else, to write a story about going fishing and catching a shark, you can't tell that story. Okay? Because you haven't experienced that. You can't tell a clear and definite story because you don't have those experiences. So the third advantage of writing about your experiences is that your ideas about your experiences are clear and definite. Okay? You may remember them your whole life. Our lesson says, you know what you do. You know what you see. Or if you do not, the effort to express it so that it will be clear to others will make you observe closely for yourself. What that means is, if you know that you're going to have to write about something, you're going to learn to take more care to pay attention to the details when you do things. You're going to learn to pay attention to the details. Like if you were going to write an essay, if you had to write a story and you were going to write a story about fishing, you could go down to the pond tomorrow and spend the day fishing, but when you go, you can think, I'm going to write about this tomorrow for my essay. And you can pay attention to all the details so that when you go to write your essay, you have really clear ideas. So one thing writers do is they take care, they make an effort to pay attention to things more clearly so that they can write about them. Okay? So you'll learn to pay more attention to what's going on. That's one of the life skills that you'll learn that will help you become a better writer. You'll just learn to pay more attention to details. Okay? So the third advantage is that the ideas are clear and definite. Let's go back to our lesson. Another advantage comes from the fact that your experiences are not presented to you through language. The experience furnishes you with the ideas So you have the ideas from your experiences, but you are free to express those ideas in your own words. The experience furnishes the ideas, but you are free to choose for yourself the words that best set forth what you wish to tell. Okay, so the fourth advantage of writing about your experience is that you can describe it and write about it with your own words. You didn't hear it from someone else. You're not telling someone else's story using someone else's words. That experience that you had can be described in your own words. And I'll give you a good example of where you can think about what this feels like. If you're ever in trouble in your life, and you decide that you want to pray for help, when you pray to God in that situation, you're going to pray with your own words. You're going to pray about your own situation. You're going to use your own ideas, your own words. And that's a very different kind of prayer than a normal prayer that you say at Mass or that you say when we pray Liturgy of the Hours or something like that. When you pray at Mass, do you make up the prayers? No, right? The Church uses a liturgy, and the Church already has the prayers written. And so when we go to Mass, we don't pray our own prayers with our own words based on our own experiences. We often pray the prayers of the Church in words that the Church writes. And that's what's kind of awkward about prayer, a liturgical prayer, is that we're expressing ideas that might not even be our own ideas. They might not even be our own experiences. For example, if the Church prays for the recovery of someone who has a disease, and you've never had that you don't even know what it's really like. It's hard for you to even understand what to pray for, right? But if you had the flu or something like that, and you heard that someone else had the flu, and you need to pray, and they ask you to pray for them, you'll be able to pray about them because you know what they're going through, right? You can even pray from your own experience. And so that's sometimes why it's awkward sometimes to pray at church, because the church is praying for things that you've never experienced, that you don't know about. And it's easier to pray with our own words about things that we've experienced. Okay, so that's just an example. Do you understand me? That's an example of what it feels like to try to communicate with someone else's ideas and someone else's experiences rather than your own ideas and experiences. So when you write, one of the advantages of writing from your own experiences is that you make up the words to describe those experiences. You don't have to remember what someone else said. You see what I mean? You make up the words. All right, so another advantage comes from the fact that your experiences are not presented to you through language. The experience furnishes the ideas, but you are free to choose for yourself the words that best set forth what you wish to tell. Now, what's also interesting about this is that two of you can have the same experience. Let's say all of you go fishing, and the next day you want to write about what you experienced when you were fishing. All of you can have the same ideas because you experienced the same things. You saw the same things, you smelled the same things, you heard the same things. You all have the same ideas. But when it's time to write about them, you're free to write about your experiences with your own words. And so what you write will be unique because you'll express those ideas in your own way. And your writing will be unique, and that may make it interesting. It may be interesting to read what one of you has to say and then what another one of you has to say, to compare the two writings. That may be interesting. So the fourth thing that's helpful about writing about your experience is that you get to tell the story. You get to explain the events. You get to choose the words, and that helps you to write more clearly and easily. Because the things of your experience are the ones with which you are most familiar, the words that best apply to those experiences are the ones that you most often use, your everyday language, and whose meanings are best known to you. You're not trying to use someone else's language. You're using your own words. Experience supplies an abundance of interesting, clear, and definite ideas. Ideas which are your own and which may be expressed in familiar language. It furnishes better material for training in expression than does either imagination or reading. Okay? Experience provides better material for training in expression than imagination or reading. Now, you'll see people put a lot of pressure on kids to read all the time. Read. And they suggest that reading is how we test who's smart and who's interested in learning and who's not. This book doesn't teach that, does it? Why? Let me ask you this to see how smart you are. Why is reading not that helpful for learning to write? Why is reading not that helpful based on this lesson?
Because you have to write like what you read, like you can't make up your own things about it.
Well, when you're reading, whose experiences are you reading about? Other people's. Whose words are you reading? Other people's. They may use words that you don't even use, right? How many times have you read a story and found words in the story that you didn't know what the words meant? If you wrote the story, would you have used those words? No, right? Reading doesn't help us as much as people say it does. One of the reasons why parents like children to read is because it just keeps them busy and quiet. And they pretend like there's so much wonderful things to learn through reading, when reading isn't that helpful for writing. Okay, it can be helpful. It can give you ideas and help you think about things. It can help your imagination. It's one of the sources of ideas, but it's not the best source of ideas. It's not the source that the best writers use to write about things. Right? Moses saw God on the mountain. We read about Moses seeing God on the mountain. Who do you think could write a better story about what it was like to see God on the mountain? Moses or us? Moses. Why? Because he saw it, right? So what's better, experience or reading? Experience. When is reading helpful? When is reading helpful? Yeah, when you can't experience it, right? When you can't experience. So for example, if Christopher Columbus sailed to America, imagine that you lived in Spain in 1492. So you were alive when Columbus sailed to America. And he was on a ship actually sailing across the ocean, actually visiting the lands of the Americas for the first time. No European had ever seen them before. And you are a boy living in Spain. You have no chance to experience those things yourself. So if he was sending home writings and was describing the place, would it be helpful to you to read those things? Yes. Why?
Use it as imagination.
No, because you can't experience them. Because you can't. And so reading is helpful to learn about things that you can't experience. But if you can experience them, reading is not the best way to learn about them. You understand that? If I wanted to teach you how to build a garden, what would be the best way to teach you? By writing a book about it for you? No. It'd be to take you in the garden and make you grow plants. Okay? So we have to be careful that we're not reading about things that we should be experiencing. Right? Our experiences are more important. They give us better ideas. They give us more ideas. They give us clearer ideas than we can ever learn by reading someone else's writing. Okay? So if you're reading a book, I mean, one of the problems with book reading is that most of the time kids just read junk, right? They just read nonsense, entertainment books. It's just like watching cartoons, except it's in a book. So we're not, obviously there's a lot of reading that's just junk. You know how you'll get yelled at for just wasting time watching some dumb show, right? Well, 100 years ago, they didn't have any television shows, and kids would get yelled at for reading some dumb book. Back in the 1500s, the church actually published lists of books that Catholics were not allowed to read. And they had to burn those books. So books used to be like movies and videos. There were books that you were allowed to read, books that you should read, and books that you shouldn't read. Books that were just a waste of time. Silly books, entertainment books, just like watching silly shows on television. But now, in the television age, when we have the internet and video games, teachers often tell kids that reading is good. And that's not true. If you're reading junk, it's not good. If you're reading about things that you should be experiencing, it's not good. You should be experiencing them. For example, let's say all of these movies and books that are made about saints. What are the saints doing in the movies? What are the saints doing in the books? What are the saints doing? No, what are the saints that you read about? When you read about the saints, what are the saints doing? Praying, right? They're actually doing good works. They're doing missionary work. What are you doing? You're sitting there reading a book. You're sitting there watching a movie. What's different between you and the saints? Your experience, right? If I turn on a video of the life of Teresa of Avila, I don't watch a movie about a woman who watched a movie about another woman. Who watched a movie about another woman. It's not a whole history of people watching movies about other people and reading books about other people. If I watch a movie about a saint or read a book about a saint, the saint is praying, he's fasting, he's working, he's studying, he's doing good works. And here I am, sitting like a fat cat on the couch, eating cupcakes, reading about saints. Okay? And this is what happens. We don't learn to think like saints and act like saints because we're just reading books about them. We're not actually participating in their experiences. And when it's time for us to talk about religion, we don't have anything to say because we don't experience it. Right? That's one of the dangers of watching movies and reading, is you start to think that you know about things that you've never actually experienced. And when it's time to talk about them or time to write about them, you really don't know what to say. You think you do, but you don't. All right? So reading is only useful when it helps us to learn about something that's important that we can't experience. Right? It's only helpful when it can help us learn about something important that we can't experience. But it's better for us, always better for us, to learn about things through experience. It gives us more ideas about them, gives us clearer ideas about them, allows us to speak and write about them. And that's why we like speaking and writing about our experiences. It's easy and fun to speak about our experiences. It's actually very difficult to lie. And you know, because you've all lied, it's difficult to lie. It's not pleasant to lie. It's hard. And you almost always get caught at some point because it's really impossible. So we want to experience things for the sake of being able to write about them, for the sake of being able to talk about them. If you want to know what it's like to be on top of a mountain, you have two options. Plan a trip to visit a mountain and go on top of a mountain, or read a book about mountains. Which is better? Going to the mountain, right? And you'll find out that many of the most famous writers in history, one of the reasons why they were great writers was because they traveled and they went places and they studied things. If you learn about the lives of famous writers, you'll learn that they actually lived so that they could write. Mark Twain had a special little cabin built where he used to write from, out in the middle of the woods. Henry David Thoreau, who we're going to see examples from his writing, he lived out in the woods. Virgil traveled around the world to see things to write about, so he could write about them clearly. So great writers actually devote their whole life to writing. They actually go see places. If you want to describe the sunset, what should you do? Get up and watch the sunset. Because there's a lot more detail. For example, what does it sound like at sunset? You guys know. If you go out in the summer and watch the sunset, what do you hear? Peepers, right? Do you hear birds chirping at sunset? Not really, no. Not really. Sunset, the birds start to calm down. The sounds change. If you wake up and watch the sun rise, what do you hear at sunrise? Birds. What does it feel like when the sun rises?
It usually feels like getting warm and stuff.
No, it's cool. You can tell you don't watch the sunrise because it's cool when the sun rises. It's usually wet because everything's covered with dew. And so if you were actually if you actually experience the sun rising, you would know there's all kinds of details, what it sounds like, what it feels like, what it looks like, what it smells like in the morning when you wake up early at sunrise. Everything is different. Everything is different. But you would only know that if you experience it. If you read a story about a sunrise, you'll only know that if the author explains all the details. And you still really won't know what it's like. You won't be able to write about it or talk about it. Okay, so the point here is that your experiences are the best sources of ideas. They're the best sources of ideas. And that should lead you to think about two things. You should write about topics that you have experience with. That's the first thing, right? So if you're given a choice to write about 4 different topics, which one should you choose? One you have experience with. That'll be the easiest topic. So that's the first thing to think about. The second thing is, if you want to learn to write well about something, or if you want to be an expert in something, if you want to talk well about something, you need to go experience it. You understand that? Because by experiencing it, you'll actually enable yourself to write well about it. And if you don't experience it, you're just going to be making stuff up. All right? And we'll see in our future lessons why it's not good to make stuff up. All right, so 4 reasons why writing about things that we have experienced is better for us than trying to write from our imagination or trying to write about things we've read about or about things we've seen in movies or heard other people talk about. Our experiences provide us with the best sources of ideas. First, they give us an abundance of ideas, endless limit of ideas. Because your senses, when you're out doing something, your senses are taking in all of the information. All of the information. And you're given an abundance of ideas. Second, they're your own ideas. You know them. They're clear. They're definite. You know them because you experienced them. Third, to continue, number 2, they're clear and definite. They're clear and definite. You're not trying to think about them. You're not trying to imagine them. You saw it. You heard it. Right? And lastly, because they're your ideas, you have the opportunity to express them and share them in your own words. And that makes your writing clear and makes it comfortable and pleasant to write because you're not trying to fake it writing other people's ideas. One thing you'll see students do, not just young students, but even adults in college and things like that, is when they write, they don't even use their own words because they're trying to pretend they're somebody else. It's the whole writing that they do, all of the writing they do is fake. They don't even write in their own language because they're trying to act like somebody else. It's just all fake academic writing. And a lot of teachers actually want students to do that and give good grades to the students who fake and just write nonsense. I know I was in a class once in college where I knew that if I just wrote with big words and kind of even confusing language, that my one professor would give me an A. And so I would just intentionally write things that I knew he would give me an A for because they sounded academic. Right? But when it's time for me to actually teach or time for me to actually write my own stuff, I know that the opposite is true. That when I write about topics I'm interested in, when I use examples from my own experience, when I use my own words, when I talk with my own personality in my own way, it's more effective. You know? But when school teachers actually reward kids for the fake writing, that's what causes confusion and makes kids bad writers. All right, so that's all for this 4th lesson. I just want to say one thing. In our textbook, in the last paragraph, the paragraph starts with because experience. That paragraph provides a really good summary of this chapter. And so I recommend you almost memorize. I mean, it would be worth memorizing that last paragraph because it's a very helpful, very good summary of this lesson. I'll read it for you one more time. Because experience supplies an abundance of interesting, clear, and definite ideas which are your own and which may be expressed in familiar language, it furnishes better material for training in expression than does either imagination or reading. That paragraph, it's actually just one sentence, provides the perfect summary for this lesson and is an example of good writing, right? You see the writer there of this book gives a good example of what a conclusion should do. Summarizes the lesson and leaves us with something helpful that we could just remember or memorize. So that's a good summary of our lesson, okay? So the point is this: when you speak or write, be yourself. Be yourself. Talk about your experiences. Use your own ideas. Use your own words. And if you do that, speaking and writing will be pleasant and you'll be an effective writer. You'll have interesting things to share. Why will your speaking and writing be interesting if you talk about your experiences? Why will it be interesting to other people? Why will it be interesting?
Because you talk about it, like make it.
No, that's not why it's interesting.
So then you gain experience.
No, that's not why.
It's in your own words.
No, that's not why it's interesting. It's interesting because it's unique, right? Your experiences are unique. You are unique. Your experiences are unique. Your writing is useful because it's unique. You don't have to imagine something to be unique. You already are unique. But you need to not allow people to try to make you act like other people. When you do that, you become boring. When you start imitating other people, you become boring. You're just like other people. And that's the problem that most students have. That's the problem with most schools. They actually make the students all study the same things, all talk the same way, write the same way. All the students become the same, and then all of a sudden it's time to apply for college or apply for a job. And what do the jobs and colleges want? Do they want everyone to be the same? No, they're looking for someone who's unique, and you've been trained to not be unique. Whereas what's actually useful about you as an individual is that you're unique. You're all different, right? You're all different. Some of you are smart, some of you are dumb, right? Some of you are good at one thing, some of you are good at another thing, and we put you all together. You're good at one thing, you're good at one thing, you're good at one thing. That group is now valuable, right? We have a doctor, a lawyer, a soldier, a mechanic. We now have a group where every individual contributes something different, and we have something useful. The doctor can ask the mechanic to explain how a car works, and the mechanic can talk to the doctor about cars. He doesn't talk to the doctor in the doctor's language. He doesn't try to be a doctor. He's a mechanic. He talks about cars, and that's interesting to the doctor because the doctor has a car. Right? And so the danger is that you start trying to imitate other people, and there are people in our society who want you to imitate everybody else. And you have to resist that pressure and be who God created you to be, because that's the only way that you can be happy, is being who God intends for you to be, to do God's will for your life. You're designed for a specific purpose, and that specific purpose is where you will be successful. Not only that, but that specific purpose will make you interesting and useful to other people. And if you try to be like other people, you'll become boring and useless. When St. Paul talks about the church, he compares it to a body. He says one person is like the eye, one person is like an ear, one person is like a stomach, one person is like a hand. Wouldn't the body be boring if every part was an eye? You see what I mean? You see the illustration? All the parts are necessary. All the parts are necessary. When somebody says this part is important and that part's not important, that's false. All the parts are important. And you have to be comfortable playing your part. And that's actually the key to being a good writer. You understand that? Being a good writer. A lot of writers were weirdos. People think that they were weirdos because they were different. And that's why they were actually good writers. Because they didn't try to be like other people. They just shared their own experiences, shared their own ideas, and that made their writing interesting. Okay? So, the best source of your ideas is your experience. Your experiences are always unique. They always supply you with an abundance of ideas. They are your own ideas, and you know them, so it's easy for you to talk about them. They're clear and definite because you can go into more and more detail because you actually saw them and experienced them. You know all the details. And lastly, because they're in your mind as ideas and you experience them, you can easily talk about them and write about them using your everyday language. You don't have to fake it. Okay? So that's all for this third lesson. To wrap up, what I'd like you to do in your notes is write a summary of what we've talked about, and that'll be it for lesson 3 in English composition.